Well, good morning, guys. Oh, it's the first day of July when I'm recording this. And I'm in here with Molly, as usual, and my office still isn't organized. And look at it, I've got books piled everywhere, and the bookshelves aren't organized right, and it's hard to organize them. It really is. Because it's like, well, do I do it by author or subject? And there are a lot of subjects, and there are a lot of authors. And I haven't figured it out yet. So you're going to have to look at the messy things for a while. You know what happened last night? It's really weird because it is July 1st. It rained all last night. It's like, what? I woke up this morning at 2 and took Molly for a walk and did laundry. And I was like, dude, it's like raining. What the heck? First, I thought that my sprinklers had gone off on the wrong day because there was like water on the sides. And like, I'll have to check that later. But then it was like spitting on me when I was going around. But you know it was even worse? Between 2:30 and 3 o'clock this morning, somebody was shooting off loud fireworks in the city. Now I'm kind of almost out in the country. All right. Of course, less out in the country every day because people are buying up the land that used to be farmland and building houses on it. But these were the big booming ones because here in Idaho, people just get the big booming ones. But between 2:30 and 3 o'clock, and I hope people shouldn't do that. You know, it's hard to sleep. And some people have something called PTSD, like especially people who've been in war and or have been through other types of really bad trauma. And it's scary to be woken up in the middle of the night and you don't know and trying like me, I have insomnia and it's hard for me to get back to sleep once I'm waking up. And I just boom, the windows are shaking. So, be nice to your neighbors. I wish I lived in one of those places where they only allowed you to shoot off fireworks like on July 4th. Because here it started on June 16th and it'll probably go till about the end of July because people just keep firing them off at night. And it's like, oh man, I get really tired. Anyway, all right, I'll stop whining. Let's get to this week's teaching on God's response to Abimelech claiming that, hey, I am, totally innocent here, even though he kidnapped Sarah. Hi, I'm Miss Tyler, and welcome to this week's episode of Context for Kids, where I teach you guys stuff most adults don't even know. If this is your first time hearing, or if you've missed anything, you can find all the episodes archived at contextforkids.podbean.com, which has them downloadable, or at contextforkids.com, where I have transcripts for readers, or on my Context for Kids YouTube channel, where I usually post slightly longer versions. All scripture this week comes from the MTV, the Miss Tyler version, which is the Christian Standard Bible tweaked a little or a lot to make the context and the content more understandable for kids. This chapter is a bit more complicated than others, and so even though I rarely do this, we're going to start again at the beginning of the chapter because this is so crazy that we have to hear the whole thing to believe it. Last week, we talked about Abraham's big lie, Abimelech's kidnapping of Sarah, and God visiting Abimelech that night in a dream to warn him to give her back or else. This week, we're going to see what God has to say about King Abimelech's shocking claim that he is an innocent man because he had no idea there was anything wrong with what he did. Because, in his world, there's nothing wrong with kidnapping, but it is a bad thing to take someone else's wife. When I was younger, they had TV shows where people with crazy family drama would come on and talk about it, and they would even sometimes get into fights on stage. But even those shows couldn't manage a crazy situation like this. Now, so here we go. Beginning of chapter 20, Genesis. From his camp in Hebron, Abraham traveled south to the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur on the border of Canaan and Egypt. While he was staying in Gerar, Abraham was telling everyone that his wife Sarah was actually just his sister. So King Abimelech of Gerar had Sarah brought to him. But God came to Abimelech in a dream at night and said to him, you're about to die because of that woman you've taken. She's married. Now, Abimelech hadn't so much as laid a finger on her, so he said, Lord, would you destroy a nation even though it's innocent? Didn't that man himself say to me, she's my sister? And didn't she say, he's my brother? I did this with a clear conscience and clean hands. I'm totally innocent here. Then God said to him in a dream, yes, I know you didn't see anything wrong with what you were doing. I have also kept you from sinning against me, so you couldn't touch her. Now give Sarah back to her husband because he's a prophet, and he will pray for you and you won't die. But if you don't give her back, you need to know that you're going to die, you and everyone in your family. Early the next morning, Abimelech got up, called all his servants together, and personally told them everything God had said. And they were all terrified. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said to him, what have you done to us? What did I ever do to you that you have brought such enormous guilt on me and my kingdom? You've done things to me that should never be done. Abimelech also asked Abraham, what made you do this? Dang, guys, we got a bunch of guilty people here who have created a big mess. According to Abimelech, Abraham and Sarah both lied to him. According to Abimelech, kidnapping a single woman is okay, and the only reason he was wrong is because he got tricked. I know it's a serious problem, and Sarah was definitely scared and all that, but when I read this, I just want to laugh. And so God gives him a warning that he and his people are all going to die because of what he decided to do based on the information he was given at the time. Abimelech says, Lord, I had no clue that I was doing anything wrong. Not at all, totally clueless. And now God has to reply to this insanity, and I bet he never wanted to be a part of this in the first place. And maybe he was even hoping that Abraham wouldn't ever do this again after losing his wife 24 years earlier and being banned from ever coming back to Egypt again. And being banned in Egypt from those days was like being banned from the supermarket, because that's where the food was, if anything bad happened. If there was another famine and there was nothing to eat in Canaan, Abraham and his household were really stuck. Why? Because people don't like to be tricked. Makes them angry because they feel dumb for trusting someone who shouldn't have been lying to them. It's so embarrassing. Have you ever been tricked by someone? I have, and when I was a kid, I tricked someone once, and I still feel bad about it, okay? But now this is a mess that only God can clean up. And he needs to start off by answering Abimelech, who is saying he's totally innocent, and I can just see God roll in his eyes. Yes, I know that you didn't think what you were doing was wrong. Notice that God only responds to Abimelech saying that his conscience was clear and not to his hands being clean. That's important, as God is just stating the obvious. Abimelech doesn't think he did anything wrong, but his hands are most certainly not clean. Kidnapping's not okay, even if Abimelech thinks it is. Abimelech is such a terrible sinner that even terrible crimes seem okay to him. But God knows that, and he's going to go easy on him. Kinda. I mean, God did threaten to kill him, but only if Abimelech doesn't give her back. Someone like Abimelech isn't going to just be reasonable, just because God asks him nicely. Instead of being all indignant because he thinks Sarah should belong to him, he's going to do whatever he can to prove to God that he is innocent and that he is the victim here. And he is, kinda, little bit, because he was tricked. But that trick just gave him reason to do what he already wanted to do. A lot of people do bad things by accident, but there are also a lot of people who are just looking for a good reason to be bad, or a bad reason to be bad. Never mind. As we go through the Bible, the Philistines are always looking for ways to be bad to their neighbors. God doesn't just stop there, though. He has to let Abimelech know how serious he is about getting Sarah back. Remember that in Genesis 18, God told Abraham that in another year, Sarah would have a baby. Now, she can't do that if she's stuck married to Abimelech. For God's promise to happen the way he said it would happen, he needs Abraham and Sarah together and married. That means that no matter what, Sarah wasn't going to end up with anyone else and Abraham wasn't going to get killed. They made the mistake of believing that God needs help keeping his promises. But a lot of things could have happened. God could have made it so that no one noticed Sarah. That'd be easy enough. He could have made everyone scared of Abraham. Again, easy. He could have made the men who came to get Sarah break out in open sores or turn them to salt or made them speak other languages. God had a lot of options here. What God did was to make Abimelech and everyone among his people sick, to keep Abimelech away from Sarah even though she was inside their city. Sarah was safe because nobody felt well enough to give her any problems. And I guess no one made the connection between being sick and Sarah being with them because God had to point it out. God had to say, I was the one who kept you away from her so that you wouldn't sin against me. Now give her back to her husband pronto. Then God drops a bombshell. Abraham is a prophet. And that would have scared the snot out of Abimelech because prophets aren't just a Bible thing. All the nations had prophets who would speak for their gods, and people were scared about what they might say, and making a prophet angry could really make the gods angry, and angry gods are dangerous gods. At least that's what they believed, and so it didn't matter if it was true or not. In the ancient world, prophets were people who could speak to God and receive messages in return. A prophet was like an ambassador between kingdoms. Say the king wanted to talk to his god or goddess, like the Philistine grain god Dagon, or wanted their opinion on something like, would there be enough rain this year to grow a good harvest? Is it the will of their god to go to war with another nation, and will they win? Or if things are going badly, they wanted to know what they had to do to make their gods happy again. They would call a prophet, who could also be a priest, and they would ask them for help with trying to figure out what was going on or what needed to go on. They didn't believe that the gods were interested in speaking to normal people. And when they got mad, they didn't think they'd speak to the king either. Think of it this way. They believed that some people were born with satellite dishes that allow them to hear what was going on in the world of the gods. Wait, do you guys know what a satellite dish is? Do they even still have them now with all their streaming and stuff? Okay, so a satellite dish is how we used to get signals from far away, not only from our planet, but from outer space too. Or at least we're trying to get signals from outer space. They look like something between a plate and a bowl, and they're like a ginormous ear. That's how they work. But in ancient times, they had specific people who could hear from the gods when no one else could. Or at least they said they could hear from the gods. If they got it right, they could get rewarded, or if they said something the king liked. But if they were wrong or made the king angry, they could wind up dead. God is calling Abraham a prophet not because he gets messages to give other people, but because God allows him to have conversations with him. Like when God told Abraham that he would inherit the land of Canaan, and Abraham said, well, what good does that do me when I don't even have any kids? Or when God told Abraham the first time that Sarah was going to have a son, Abraham was allowed to complain about wanting Ishmael to be his heir instead because he really loved him. And the biggest example was when Abraham was allowed to bargain with God to try to save the people of Sodom from being destroyed. That wasn't a normal thing in those days, and it still isn't. I mean, Abraham was hearing from God in some very unique ways that most people can't relate to. Abraham knew certain parts of the future because God kept making him promises about the future. Abraham knew that God would give his children the land of Canaan. He knew he would have a son someday. He knew that Sarah would have a son someday. He knew that Sodom would be destroyed before it actually happened. That's the kind of thing that prophets got told. Prophets were the people who heard from God, not usually about the future, even though that's mostly what Abraham was told. Usually they were giving messages to the people about what God wanted them to know. In the Hebrew Bible, the most common messages that prophets gave was stop sinning or something terrible is going to happen. Return to God and obey him and love him, and he'll forgive you for everything you've done. When they did predict the future, it usually went something like this. If you don't stop worshiping other gods, I'm going to let another nation come in and stomp on you because I will stop protecting you. You're going to find out what it's like to live in another nation without me. The people who were wise listened, and the people who were evil, greedy, foolish, or rebellious did not. But not everyone who said they were prophets actually were. Some of them were just people who made money telling powerful people what they wanted to hear. Even in the Bible, we see false prophets talking to the kings of the northern kingdom of Israel when the king isn't willing to listen to God's true prophet. That king even said that he hates God's true prophet because he never says anything good about him. The other prophets were telling the king to do whatever he wanted to do. I wouldn't be surprised if Abimelech thought his gods wanted him to take Sarah. When Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream correctly, Pharaoh decides that Joseph's a prophet and a priest too, and put him in charge of everything in Egypt. What about Balaam? Well, Balaam's kind of weird, and we'll talk to him about him when we get to Numbers, because he's kind of a skunk, and he doesn't worship our God, but he could hear him anyway and had to do whatever he said, even though he wanted to go and get rich by cursing the children of Israel in the wilderness. Balaam was a talented prophet, but also a bad dude at the same time. The books in the Bible contain things that were said by famous prophets, but also by prophets that we don't know the names of. Samuel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and others have whole books named after them. But all of that started with Abraham, who was the first person called a prophet in the entire Bible. Abraham had a unique relationship with God that no one else ever had, and he was very different from the later prophets once they were their own nation. But since Abraham was the beginning of God's plans to make Jesus happen, it made sense that he would be a prophet too. So Abimelech has been told that Abraham isn't just a normal guy, but the go-to prophet for this God who is threatening to kill him in a dream. That means that by hurting Abraham, Abimelech is also attacking God, and that's a huge no-no. Not only does Abimelech have to give Sarah back, but he also needs to make Abraham happy enough to pray for him so that everyone who is sick can get better. That has to be the worst part of this. Not only was he tricked by this foreign Abraham guy, but he needs prayer from him. Well, that wouldn't make me very happy. I think about the people who have tricked me, and if God told me that I needed to go back to them and get them to pray for me, I don't know what I would do. But usually when we are tricked, we don't end up kidnapping anyone, so it's hard for me to really relate to any of this. Abimelech got tricked, but he is a kidnapper and a thief and a bad guy, even if he doesn't understand that. Abimelech thinks he only did wrong because he was lied to, but we know the truth. Abimelech was wrong because he was wrong, period. There's a big difference sometimes between what we think of ourselves and what we're doing and what is true about ourselves and what we're doing. God has had to just really set me straight so many times when I believed I was being loving and kind when I was really just being a mean jerk. So Abimelech gets up early the next morning and calls all his servants together. and told them what happened. He told them everything, and boy, were they scared. I mean, none of them had been feeling right, and now they know why. There was a God angry at them, and that God was on the side of this outsider from another place. And Abimelech, their king, had stolen the guy's wife, and some of them had actually gone to get her. They were all in big trouble. Every single one of them knew that stealing someone else's wife was like the worst thing ever. No one thought that was okay. They were worried and probably a bit angry too. Why did this person trick them? What had they ever done to him? Would he pray for them, or would he just walk off and leave them sick, or would he just refuse to pray and let them all die and take their stuff and live in their city? Abraham had so much power over their lives right now that it wasn't even funny. They needed to hope that the man who lied to them would have mercy on them. I don't know. Would you trust Abraham to do the right thing if you were one of the Philistines? So Abimelech sent people to go get Abraham, and Abraham came into the city. Abimelech was scared, but he was also very angry, and he wanted some answers. Kings aren't used to being tricked and lied to. That's what kings got to do to other people, and no one could do anything to stop them. In fact, kings often believed that they were the sons of gods and goddesses, and that everyone else had to mind their manners around them or else. All of this would have been shocking to Abimelech, who probably didn't think he could be fooled so easily. It made him look weak and foolish to his people, who were now suffering because of his mistake and because of kidnapping. Let's not forget about that. We can just imagine what happened next as Abraham walks up to Abimelech and Abimelech yells at him, "What on earth did you do? What have we ever done to you that you would trick us into doing something so awful? Your God considers us all to be guilty of a terrible crime that never would have happened if you had just been honest with us. But no, you had to tell everyone that she was just your sister, and to make matters worse, she told everyone that you were her brother. What you have done to me is totally unacceptable and never should have happened. Why did you do it?" Okay, I added a bit for context, but that pretty much sums up the problem from Abimelech's point of view, where he sees himself as a total victim and Abraham as some sort of cruel trickster wanting all of his people dead. Next week, we will talk about Abraham's response and the mystery of whether or not he is actually telling the truth or just telling more lies to cover up his tracks. If you've gone through my book, Honor and Shame in the Bible, you know that ancient people didn't think that lying to people outside of their family was really wrong or bad, but I'll explain that next week too for anyone who doesn't understand. So Abraham made it easier for Abimelech to do the wrong thing by lying to him. But what does Jesus do? Jesus gets people to do the wrong thing by telling them the truth. And that's what we should want, because the truth gives people the chance to do what is right. If they get tricked into doing what is right, then they really didn't have any choice at all. And when they find out they were lied to, they might start thinking that good is bad and bad is good. But if we just give them the truth, then they have the opportunity to be good for the right reasons. When Jesus came to Jerusalem for his last Passover, he got into a lot of arguments with the leaders of Israel about this and that thing. But their questions weren't all honest questions. Some people were trying to trick him into making this or that group of people angry with him. The Romans, the people who supported the wicked King Herod, the Pharisees, the chief priests, the scribes, or just the regular people who followed him. They wanted Jesus to say the wrong thing in the wrong way, and so they kept trying to trap him in a no-win situation. A no-win situation is when you can't win no matter what you do, because no matter what you do, you'll be in trouble with somebody. Either the Pharisees are going to be mad at you, or the Romans, for example. When Jesus was asked whether or not it was okay to pay taxes to the Roman emperor with coins that called him the Son of God, if he said no, then the people would be happy, but the Romans might arrest him. And if he said yes, then the Romans would be happy, but the people who were poor and hungry would be angry. It was a trick question, and Jesus knew it. A trick question is something people ask when they want to hurt you or embarrass you. It's a bad thing to do. But Jesus wasn't fooled, and he changed the subject instead by telling them that they shouldn't have coins in their pockets, saying that Caesar was the son of God while they were at the temple. Oops. That didn't go well for them. When they arrested Jesus and were asking him questions, Jesus did two things. Sometimes he was quiet when people were lying about him. And when they asked him questions about who he was honest with them. The chief priest wanted Jesus dead, and so Jesus didn't try to defend himself from the lies they were telling to try and find a reason why they could ask the Romans to kill him. And when they asked him questions he could answer about things that were true, he told them the truth, and that made them even angrier than the lies people were telling about him. The chief priests who were in charge of the temple were determined to have him killed, and they were going to do it one way or the other, whether Jesus lied or told the truth. So why should he lie? Why should he tell lies to try and save himself? They were sinners, but he didn't want to be a sinner too. Sometimes it's easy to forget that Jesus was watching while Abraham told those lies to Abimelech. He chose to do that. I bet he was disappointed that Abraham didn't trust God enough to just be honest and to let Abimelech just try to do whatever he wanted to do. He might have left them alone, or he might have tried to take Sarah, or he might have tried to kill Abraham, but Abraham had no reason to worry because God had promised them a new baby in another year. They literally couldn't be killed. They had no reason to lie or to trick Abimelech. And now Abimelech and his people are angry at Abraham and sick and terrified. And Sarah got kidnapped. Abraham compromised. He didn't trust God. He tricked a bad man, and it didn't do him any good at all. Abraham should have trusted God enough to tell the truth. In chapter 21, we'll find out what happens when we lie to people and they end up not trusting us at all. Abraham wasn't trying to protect Sarah with his lies, just himself. And there are lies we tell to protect other people that aren't about not trusting God or trying to trick someone into doing something bad. You know, there have always been Christians who lied to evil people so that innocent people would be protected. Like on the Underground Railroad and during the Holocaust. They were risking their own lives so that other people could live. That wasn't what Abraham was doing here. Abraham was assuming that every other man he met on his travels was evil and that he needed to lie about who Sarah was. This wasn't like hiding people from Hitler or helping people to escape slavery. I love you. I'm praying for you. Lying is serious business. Even if it doesn't get us into trouble right away, it can really hurt others.